Episode of Perspective Philosophy. In today's episode, I will be reviewing the Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson debate. Believe it or not, I have never seen this debate. And for anyone who is new here, my name is Lewis, and I'm a PhD student studying philosophy. And yeah, I've never actually seen the Jordan Peterson-Sam Harris debate. So this is probably a bit weird because it's like 3 years old or something, maybe more. So I'm going to give you a philosophical review of the stances that are taken in this video. My understanding of Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris is somewhat limited. I know Peterson more than Harris, but I know that Harris is a physicalist, neurobiologist, I do believe, argues for ethics being instantiated within our biology, but then takes a presuppositional stance. So, the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And Jordan Peterson, I can't say for his meta-ethical stance, but I do know that he is very fond of Christian theological, what's the right word for it, metaphor and analogy. He sees it as useful for guiding one's life. So this should be an interesting discussion between the two, since Sam Harris is an atheist and Peterson is a Christian, I do believe. But a controversial kind of Christian. He's a Christian from what I believe, who doesn't necessitate that God exists in any literal sense. So he might very well be considered a humanist or something like that. I'm not sure his specific stance on the existence of the divine. So yeah, this should be an interesting discussion. Right. So, before we begin, I'd just like to clarify that this is one of 4 debates they had. I've chose the London one. Not sure why. It just seemed like the most fitting since I'm English, and the rest weren't in England. So, I was going to start with the first one, but the quality didn't look as good. So, we're just going to go with the London debate. And I think it's on the same topic. I'm hoping that it's going to be I hope they're going to talk about ethics, because that's what I care mostly about. I do care about the existence of God, but then debating it is tentative to say the least, unless it's getting into the theology. And I don't believe that either participant is qualified theologically to debate the finer points of religion. I know that Sam Harris is supposed to be one of the 4 horsemen, of the atheist rationalist kind of apocalypse. And from what I'm aware, almost every single one of them was terrible, especially Richard Dawkins, who really just needs to stick to evolutionary biology. Christopher Hitchens seems like the best one. Anyway, so people are probably wondering why I'm not covering the inauguration. And it's probably because I don't care. One American president leaves, another one joins, and the cycle of world domination continues. So, yeah, although I'm happy to see Trump leave, very happy to see Trump leave, I'm not happy to see Biden get sworn in. So, so let's get on with some philosophy rather than and focus on the finer things in life. It's so strange to see a group of like 3 nerds really get like cheered on a stage, like whoa, like rock stars, like whoa. It's like it's the nerds. Like, honestly, if someone told me this was possible, I would have felt a lot better becoming a philosopher.
Well, good evening, London. Two weeks ago, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson met in person for the first time on stage in Vancouver. 2 nights ago, the 3 of us got together for the first time in Dublin and it's a huge thrill for all of us to now be here with you in the O2. As I said to Travis when these events were planned, I'm not moderate enough to be a moderator, but I'm going to do a little bit of fielding to begin with. So let me start.
I hate that they always need to have the jokes, like the not very good jokes, like ha ha ha. Now back to what we actually came for.
By saying a little of some of the ground we are going to be trying to cover here tonight. We're going to be dealing with the conflict between science and reason. We're going to be addressing the legitimacy. Did I say science and reason?
Science and reason, yes.
Occasionally there is.
We're not addressing that. We're going to be looking at the legitimacy of holding on to religion in any form. And we are also going to be addressing the fact that we need to hide in a sports stadium to address serious issues. But I think to begin with, I'm going to hand over to Sam, and he's going to kick us off properly.
Sure.
Hide in a sports stadium. Isn't that one of the largest venues in the UK? Didn't they sell out one of the largest venues in the UK?
Thank you. And first, thank you all for coming out. You really can't imagine how humbling this is to be here with you. You really should just take a moment to appreciate this from our side, because Justin Bieber is not coming out to sing in the middle of this, as amusing as that would be. And though we put a date like this on the calendar with apparent confidence, there's really no guarantee that you guys are going to show up, and we will never take this for granted. So it's really an immense privilege to be here with you. So
can't wait to sell out the O2, guys. When people are coming to see Perspective Philosophy, have a chat with Slavoj Žižek on why you should be vegan.
I thought I could start by first acknowledging how fun this has been to have these series of dialogues with Jordan. Now this is the fourth event we've done, and the second with Douglas. And we clearly share a common project. I mean, we are trying to figure out how to live the best lives possible, both
without reading any philosophy. Yes, this would be their common project.
Individually and collectively, and we're trying to figure out how to build societies that safeguard that opportunity for as many people as possible. And I think we each have a sense that ideas are really the prime movers here. That it's not that the world is filled with bad.
Oh, the prime movers, did he just say? Oh, yeah, some real religion, guys. This is where we're supposed to be. Let's see. I wonder if he's going to deal with that one.
People doing bad things because that's what bad people do. Though there's some of that. It is mostly that so much of humanity is.
Sorry, the philosopher in us just got excited as soon as I heard anything Aristotelian.
Living under the sway of bad ideas, and it's bad ideas that can cause good people, or at least totally normal people like ourselves, to do bad things, all the while trying to live the best possible lives. And that really is the tragedy of our circumstance, that we can be that confused. So this is where the difference between Jordan and me in particular opens up, which is, how do you view religion in this contest between good ideas and bad ideas? And for me, religion emphatically gets placed on the side of bad and old and worth retiring ideas, or ideas worth retiring.
God is dead, probably, kind of mentality. And I wonder if, like Jordan obviously, I don't believe takes it literal. So I'm probably going to fall on the side of Jordan Peterson here, because I think spiritual life is essential to an individual to live a a meaningful existence. Now, you can get that through ethics and ethical community. You don't necessarily need that through religion and any form of mysticism. And obviously, religion itself is a very broad term. So I don't know if they're going to deal with, the Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, or they're just going to focus on the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Iron. And I guess by analogy, I would ask you to consider astrology. Right now, maybe I can just get a sense of who I'm talking to. What percentage of you, I want to know, believe in astrology, which is to say, who among you, and you can signal this by applause or howls of enthusiasm, what percentage of you, let me just spell it out so you know what you're committing to, and you know how crazy your neighbor is, in fact. What percentage of you believe that human personalities and human events and the difference between good and bad luck in a human life is the result of what the planets are doing against the background of stars? Let's hear it. Somebody out there. Okay, so now you should know that something like 25% of your neighbors believe that. There you go. So I'm here. Wait. I'm hearing a heckler among the astrologers. Is that possible? This is the first astrological heckler I've heard. You must be an Aries, sir. So it won't surprise you. I have a related question, which is what percentage of you, I want to know, are religious? Which is to say, who among you believe in God, a personal God, a God that can hear prayers, a God that can take an interest in the lives of human beings and occasionally enforce good outcomes versus bad outcomes? Who among you, and now again, I want to hear applause or silence, believe in that sort of God? Okay, so this is my concern. This is my concern with what Jordan has been saying and writing these many months. I feel that you're in danger of misleading this second group of people. That the way you talk about God has convinced and will continue to convince some percentage of humanity that it's fine to hold on to this old sort of God, this God that can hear prayers and that can intervene or not in the lives of human beings. And as we've begun to explore, I think there are a lot of problems with that kind of belief. If nothing else, there are many such gods on offer, and devotion to them becomes irreconcilable among true believers. And my concern is that you could do exactly what you do with religion with astrology, right? It would be no more legitimate to obfuscate the boundary between clear thinking and superstition there, because this traditional God and the doctrines that support him.
But what's wrong with that anyway? Let's say if you were going to do the same thing with astrology, but then make it have a rational, ethical foundation, and then use it as a spiritual community in order to formulate ideas and express abstract concepts, there'd be no real issue. The difference between astrology and, let's say, like a concept of a divine in Christianity, for example, in the Judeo tradition, really is to do with empirical reality. That you could observe empirical reality and then create a determinist outcome, whilst Christianity argues for free will. So there is a very big difference there alone, and that's what has to be considered. And I think that, hopefully Peterson will criticize that as being a conflation of different metaphysical instantiated beliefs. So Judeo-Christian beliefs, arguably, not all of them, but mostly promote free will. The idea of free will, that you're in control of your actions, you're responsible for your actions, and that's in relation to an abstract God, which is synonymous with good. And then, obviously, your enlightened Christian believes that the Bible is metaphor and analogy, and uses it to represent the divinity that exists within either man or the divinity of God, in relation to a creator who is not necessarily committing the acts that happened in the Old Testament and the New Testament, but takes it to be an ethical story, a narrative, a fable, if you will, parable. In relation to how we should live our lives and the basis of ethical discourse, which is why Catholics obviously rely upon the church, and the consideration of the Bible is only as important as obviously the discourse within the church. The Bible's no more important than the church for a Catholic because of its interpretation and how we should, live our lives around the scripture. And so I would say that is a big difference between, let's say, an enlightened Catholic and a dogmatic astrologist. That doesn't mean that you couldn't have a similar, stance with astrology. And, it could, if in an enlightened form, arguably take the position of something more akin to, maybe it's a Zen Buddhist position of the observer being, being only an observer in a deterministic universe, and the motions of the heavenly bodies are representative of the order of the universe, which is predetermining the likely outcomes of an individual's actions, and obviously that we're along for the ride. Obviously divorced of the mysticism in this, it could be perhaps useful, and there's no reason to heckle that idea. I think that ultimately it's probably not what would happen, but you can get enlightened forms of religion, and I think conflating the more exaggerated and extreme forms of religion in place of the enlightened forms of religion is only a sign of dogmatism itself, because it rejects the historical improvements that have been perpetuated from scientific development, like the Copernican revolution and the philosophical enlightenment, with Immanuel Kant and even people like Friedrich Nietzsche. So yeah,
are no firmer ground than astrology is now today. And astrology, you could almost everything you say about religion, it's the fact that it has organized human thinking for thousands of years, that it's a cultural universal, that every group of people has given rise to some form of it, that it has archetypal significance, that it has powerful stories. All of that can be said about astrology, and in fact, some additional things can be said about astrology that would argue in its favor. For instance, astrology is profoundly egalitarian. There's no bad zodiac sign. Whoever you are, everyone's got a great zodiac sign, and
he says that. But then I was on the metro with my girlfriend a while ago, and this absolutely crazy lady, see her now and again, stops her and she asks, like, she's obsessed with zodiac signs. She's like, what zodiac signs are you? She finds out my girlfriend's zodiac sign. She finds out mine, and she's like, Cancer. And she's like, Cancer. She's like treating us as if I'm amazing. Like, this is great. Like, we're best friends. Finds out my girlfriend's a Capricorn. I think Capricorn. I don't know the zodiac signs. I think a Capricorn. Laura, are you a Capricorn? Anyway, I think she's a Capricorn. Anyway, next thing you know, hates, like, dislikes her. She's like, Cancer and Capricorn, they're not going to work out. Starts telling us all this. She was like, just be friends. Just be friends. Don't be together in a relationship. Just be friends. And all this sort of stuff. So, like, saying that, like, they're all equal, well, it depends upon someone's worldview, because the difference between zodiac signs and Christianity is that everyone is equal under God. Right? With a zodiac sign, everyone is given value dependent upon their relationship with another. And so there is an inherent dynamic which creates an inequality in relation to, like, whether you're a Capricorn and a Cancer, or a Cancer and an Aries, or an Aries and a Gemini, or whatever's going on. These are essentially like power differentials between individuals that need to be taken into consideration. So I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's an advantage of astrology.
It's just an inconvenient fact of the discipline that if I read you Charles Manson's horoscope, 95% of the audience would find it relevant, and that's how easily falsifiable astrology is. But that.
I thought he said 25%, not 95% would find it relevant. I thought he said 25% at the start. So why would 95% think it's relevant if only 25% believe in it? Who the hell would genuinely believe that?
My concern is that we could live in a world where societies are shattered over things like, different zodiac interpretations. And we don't live in that world for good reason, because we
He looks like he's dying inside Jordan, doesn't he? Just like, please stop comparing us to an astrologist. Please stop comparing us to an astrologist.
have beaten astrology into submission. And I would say that religion, in terms of revealed religion and belief in a personal God, is, over the centuries, getting the same treatment by science and rationality, and should be. And it is a perverse circumstance that we live in a world that is shattered by religion.
But we also live in a world that's arguably shattered by science in the way that it's approached. The overvaluation of the scientific paradigm is something that Nietzsche talks about. Even though he's dismissing religion, he talks about the overvaluation of science being a byproduct of the rejection of religion and being part of the same Christian tradition, and thinking itself separate is actually part of the problem, because he sees it as just another aesthetic ideal competing for attention among the population without any consideration of reason and foundation. Obviously, he doesn't think there is foundation for most things, but I think this is somewhat true. I think that power dynamics as they are, if individuals can be dogmatic about religion, individuals can be equally dogmatic about science. Overly invested in scientific paradigms to rely upon certain power structures without actually considering whether that power structure is giving them right information and whether they are using right reason in relation to it. And then this is where you can get a divisionary society in which people take, for example, an atheist stance and condemn a religious stance dogmatically. And what's the difference between religious dogmatism and atheist dogmatism? They're both dogmatic at the end of the day and have no value towards humanity as a whole.
So I think what I'll do first is adopt the exceptionally difficult and likely counterproductive position of saying something not so much in defense of religion, but in defense of astrology, knowing full well that that's fundamentally a fool's errand. But there's something I want to point out, is that, first of all,
Yeah, that is not where I'd want to be right now. How do I defend astrology? Now, here's my guess. I think Jordan's going to take a very metaphorical view of astrology and argue its significance through the socio-cultural format in which an individual's thinking. Being a psychoanalyst, he's going to say, look, if people are taking the position that astrology is a relevant and a relevant tool to understand individuals and understand themselves, then it has significance in terms of the psychological development of individuals, and therefore should not be dismissed outright without risking alienating the identity of millions of individuals in society.
Astrology was astronomy in its nascent form. And astrology was also science in its nascent form, just like alchemy was chemistry in its nascent form.
Okay, I didn't expect that.
And so sometimes you have to dream a crazy dream with all of the error that crazy dream entails, because you have an intuition that there's something there to motivate you to develop the intuition to the point where it actually becomes of genuine practical utility. Now, when we look back on the astrologers, and we view their contributions to the history of the world with contempt, we should also remember that the people who built Stonehenge, for example, and the first people who determined that our fates were in part written in the stars, were people whose astrological beliefs were indistinguishable from their astronomical beliefs. And you might think, well, in what sense is your fate written in the stars? And I would say it's certainly the case insofar as there are such things as cosmic regularities. So it was the dream of astrology that there was some relationship between the movement of the planetary bodies and the fixed stars and human destiny, and that's what drove us to build the first astronomical observatories, and to also determine that there was a proper time for planting and a proper time for harvesting, and a way of orienting yourself in the world, for example, by using the North Star. It's also the poetic ground that enabled us to identify the notion that you could look up and orient yourself towards the heavens, and that there was a metaphorical relationship between that and positioning yourself properly in life. And
which is actually an interesting take. And to be entirely honest with you, I find that, like fundamentally it doesn't justify astrology, of course. It just says that it was historically significant. Obviously not everything that was historically significant should remain significant in our lives today, and that would be a real criticism of this position. But it does show that the identities of individuals, that it had some utility, and that the utility in regards to religion is to be instantiated. That religion itself can be a metaphorical tool to allow an individual to order their life by a certain standard. And sometimes that standard is in relation to the empirical world, and sometimes that standard is related to a logical end, something like a prime mover or an unchanged, or an Aquinian, like unchanged changer, like the unmoved mover. And that would, I think, be a logical, abstract valuation of an individual in relation to the world. Understanding yourself in relation to what is not just what is known, but what is knowable. Not just what is, but what could be. And that does order an individual's life. It does allow for the movement of an individual towards a rational end. And I could see a value in that.
at a deeper level, the cosmos was the place that the human imaginative drama was externalized and draped itself out into the world as something that was essentially observable, so that we could derive great orienting fictions from the observation of our imagination. And so part of the problem that Sam is pointing to is the difficulty of distinguishing valid poetic impulse from invalid poetic impulse, and that really is a tremendous problem. You see that arise also in people who have religious delusions attendant upon manic depressive disorder or schizophrenia. But so much of what eventually manifests itself as hardcore pragmatic scientific belief has its origin in wild flights of poetic fantasy. And it's also the case, by the way, that that's actually how...
Funnily enough, sounds almost like he sounds almost like Plato valuing the artist and the lover alongside the philosopher, almost seeing a primordial drive towards the good in the artist, or the lover rather, towards beauty. The good and beauty were the same thing, arguably, in ancient Greece, like agathos, and so a value of beauty in and of itself. And so is being driven towards that as the lover, whilst the philosopher is driven towards the same thing, beauty, agathos, but understands it to a higher degree, is drawn to it in a rational way. And so although the artist for Plato, the lover for Plato will never see the form of the good, because they lack the reason which would allow them to observe it in its true sense, and will always be confined by the body and the senses and seek it in the corporeal, in the particular, and will never elevate themselves to the universal. There is an evaluation of the world which is almost lucky by design, consequentially lucky, in which relates an individual's goal towards something which is genuinely valuable. And so the perpetuation of those desires is a good thing in the philosopher as well, because it moves the individual in the right way. So yeah, it's almost almost like a Platonic understanding of these things.
How your brain is organized, as far as I can tell, that
of course,
when
and
it isn't just me. I actually, there's a very large.
This is what I don't understand with the whole Jungian position, right? Like, that makes so much sense in relation to something like psychoanalytics, in relation to the individual's socio-political background, in the construction of an identity and conceptualization, and then they just start talking about brains as if they know anything about them. And this is like part of the problem, because it ultimately relies upon almost a reductionist thinking. And there is an article in relation to dreams I was reading not too long ago by Jung, in which he says at the start of the article, we must presume that the brain causes the mind in some way. Of course, he doesn't give an argument for that, so it's question begging. Say, why must we assume this?
What would you call it? Research literature outlining the relative functions of the right and left hemisphere, and it certainly appears to be the case that when we encounter something absolutely unknowable or unknown, what we do is drape that unknown thing in fantasy as a first pass.
Of course, the right-left hemisphere understanding of neurology is arguably being debunked to hell. So,
approximation to the truth, and then refine that fantasy as a consequence of iterative critical analysis. And so Sam believes that.
But all of that could have been said without an understanding, without the iteration of right and left hemisphere research. You could have said that, look, individuals seem to act like this in relation to their understanding of the world. Once they're incapable of, like, let's say, a logical instantiation of something like beyond a certain level, then they, drape it in fantasy and mythology in order to grasp maybe the higher, more abstract levels of it. And that would be a great point, and it's not something that would necessarily require any reductionist thought. So why did he bring physicalism into it? Like, why did he bring reductionism into it?
That what should happen is that the poetic and fictional domain should be supplanted by the rational domain.
Let me just close the loop there. Not
okay.
Quite. I think we need poetry and fiction, and then there's more to engaging with reality than being a scientist in a white lab coat. But we need to be able to clearly distinguish fact from fantasy, or fact from merely fertile flights of the imagination. And we want to be rigorous there and rational.
You see, this is where I would prefer, and I think everyone here could do with a Lacanian position, because it actively separates imagination, reality, and language, signification, into three poles, and shows that the emergence of language and imagination happens in signification. In language, the real and imagination is combined in signification. It is in the use of language that we grasp reality in its true sense, in understanding reality, and that imagination is integral in many ways to the production of a reality from which we can understand. And so the agent cannot be divorced from the world that they create. And they are just as much a producer of the world as the world produces them in order to understand it. And that, I think, is would be a nice way of looking at this, rather than necessarily saying that we just need to draw lines, and once we've drawn lines, then we'll understand individuals. It's like, understand the psychoanalytic basis of the individual within the world, and understand the ideological basis of the world around them. And then you've got a hermeneutic relationship of understanding the world as it is in relation to the agents who are observing it.
There, and it's not that there's no place for mere creativity that's not on the rails of rationality.
Well, look, fair enough then, but I mean then partly what we are disputing is the relative import and of those two domains. Let's say the poetic and the fictional and the rational.
And the status of religion now in that.
Well, I have a hard time reconciling that to some degree with your more what would you say, formal statements about the problem, because your mechanism, the mechanism that you put forth above all, outside of truth, is rationality. And it isn't clear to me if you're willing to allow the utility of spiritual experience, which you do, and if you're willing to make, what would you say, allowances for the necessity of the poetic imagination, exactly how it is that is also encapsulated under the rubric of pure rationality. See, and here's something, you can tell me what you think about this, and I've been thinking a lot about what Sam and I have been talking about, by the way. So I'm making the case in my writing that democratic institutions not only grew out of the Judeo-Christian substrate, but that they're that they're properly ensconced within that substrate. But I'm also perfectly aware that not every religious or poetic system gives rise to democratic institutions, first, and also that there are Christian substructures, maybe the most obviously in the case of the Russian Orthodox Church,
Right.
where the same metaphysical principles apply, but out of which a democracy did not emerge. And so it does seem to me that what we have in the West is the consequence of the interplay between the fantasy-predicated, poetic Judeo-Christian tradition and the rational critique that was aimed at that by the Enlightenment figures. And that seems to me to mirror something like the proper balance between the right hemisphere and its poetic imagination and the left hemisphere and its critical capacity. And then I would say that part of the way, so one of the questions you...
Interesting. I mean, I would say, I don't know enough about, obviously, the Russian Orthodox to even comment on that. I would say that what I would pull into question is what I would be saying rather is does the imagination not have rational purport? That, like, so for example, when a scientist understands reality or attempts to understand the reality in a theoretical sense, they are engaged in an imaginative endeavor. And so, excuse me. And so just as much as the philosopher or the theologian, the scientist is dependent upon a faculty of humanity in relation to the negation of the here and now and an understanding of what, could be. 1 second there. That's a good boy. Excuse me. Then I would also say that in relation to democracy growing out of Christianity, I think there is an argument to be made there, but it's not just out of Christianity, to be entirely honest with you. I don't think that democracy grew out of Christianity. I think democracy grew out of ancient Greece and the direct democracy that existed in Athens, which had more to do with their cosmological understanding of the world in relation to, what it meant to live the good life. And their understanding that there is no such thing as a good, like a citizen that was that could teach excellence, and they created like the foundations, I would argue, for democracy, not Christianity. Christianity stole those foundations and used them as a way to perpetuate its own. Well, actually, I would say it instantiated those foundations to a philosophical level which had not been seen in ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks thought of it in relation to the mysticism from which they came from, and then sought to philosophically justify it. While the Christians saw religion as a fundamental tenet of their worldview, and that equality under God as fundamental to their understanding of reality. And so democracy in relation to that is a natural byproduct. If we're all equal and we're all reason is God given and so on, then we have the development of equality. Then we have the development of equality, continuing in relation to the Christian tradition. But it's important to note that it didn't instantly lead to democracy in the first place. Obviously, the first thing that it led to was the divine right of kings, actually arguing. Stop it. Arguing that there was a justification for an inequality in the first place in relation to the hierarchy of God over man. And then we had what was called, the hierarchy of angels? So you had like God, angels, the Pope, the cardinals, and like the kings, the cardinals, like the bishops, like the dukes and everything. And then obviously at the bottom you've got ordinary people, slaves, ordinary people like men, women, slaves, animals. Okay. And Christianity was first used to justify that position, not a form of democracy, and I think that needs to be considered in this, so that the imagination, which has with reason, has allowed for an individual to understand the world in this way. It's only in relation to the concept of abstract right that it has been able to develop this way. And I would say that has more to do with Christian theology and the understanding of the good, which was inspired massively by Plato, and then once again inspired by the ancient Greeks in the form of Thomas Aquinas in relation to the prime mover, and an understanding of a being which is perfect in and of itself, and what is the concept of goodness. This theological debate was what I would say was the foundation of equality as we see it now, which led obviously to the Enlightenment, which was incredibly Christianly organized. I mean, if you look, Immanuel Kant being a neo-Lutheran at birth, inspired by Luther as a rejection of the authoritarianness of the church, running with a theology which argued that the church was not respecting the fundamental tenets of Christianity, led to an instantiation of reason above the institution of the church, which ultimately inspired Kant to make his foundation of ethics, the categorical imperative, the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, and a movement away from the moral authority of the church. Now, the issue was this ultimately led to an antithesis of reason. Arguably, the foundation of reason became individualized, and this individualism became the fundamental tenet of atheism. And then atheism rejects religion and the ethical domains that existed in. And arguably now we have a large amount of individuals who lack of a sense of identity in relation to the power structures that previously existed, which would have instantiated their identity, and so have lost the good traditions as well as the bad. And what we need now is to take the power of reason and apply to tradition in a positive sense. Keep those traditions which are good, remove those which are bad. And I think Gadamer shows the hermeneutics of this position and the need for Bildung. So yeah, that's what I would say. I think that understanding that Christianity was the foundation of equality and necessary for democracy is, I think, a little bit of a jump, if I'm honest.
You brought up was, how do we decide which, let's say, religious intuitions are valid? And I think we do that in part through negotiated agreement, because people have, look, even among the Catholics, say in the medieval time, there was an absolute horror of heresy. So if you were some mendicant monk and you had a profound religious vision, the probability that you were going to be tried as a heretic and burnt at the stake was extremely high, because even the gatekeepers of the religious tradition realized that religious revelation untrammeled by something like community dialogue, something like that, was something of extraordinary danger. And so I would agree with you that the poetic imagination and the...
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but I don't think it had as much to do with the religious thinker of the time genuinely seeing the religious... Charlie? Sorry, my dog was going to knock everything over there if I didn't stop that. There's a good laugh. Okay. Yeah, I think that there was obviously the power structure and the ideology to play there, which shows also the lack of reason. It wasn't that the evaluation of reason being important. It was also the dogmatism of the institution, which is why the Copernican revolution and the Enlightenment showed that ultimately it was being used as a tool to perpetuate an egoistical interest, and that is also the essentially the issue that we have with with ideology as a whole. And so understanding a certain tradition to be embedded with reason is a bit, it may be somewhat true, but it's the valuation of reason at that time was not of a way in which could have conceptually evaluated the world and the power structure conceptually evaluated the world separate from the power structure of its evaluation. The Catholic Church existed as Slavoj Žižek would call it, the sublime object of ideology. And so the idea of heresy was anything that went against the Catholic worldview and not anything that necessarily divorced it away from reason. And so there existed, I think, a fundamental contention in relation to how we should see the world, whether we should see it as it is or whether we should see it dogmatically through ideology. And this is why heresy was used as a tool in order to suppress political opposition just as much as instantiate a rational understanding of reality.
The ground of religious revelation is something that can lead people dangerously astray. But I would say at the same time that it constitutes the grounds of our initial exploration and that it's actually ineradicably necessary.
Okay, well, I'll briefly address that, and then I want to ask a question that brings Douglas directly in here. I think this is an instance of what's called the genetic fallacy, the idea that because something emerged the way it did historically, as a matter of historical contingency, it is good. The origin is in fact good and worth maintaining, or that it was in fact necessary. That we couldn't get these good things like democracy any other way, or were unlikely to. And I would say that there's no Abrahamic religion that is the best conceivable womb of democracy or anything else we like, science.
That's a great place to get Douglas involved.
Yeah. So, but I would just add one other category of thinking here. We have what we think is factual and methods by which we derive facts. And I would put rationality there and an empirical engagement with reality. Then we have other good things in life, like fiction and flights of fancy that are pleasing for one reason or another and could be generative toward the first category. But then we also have, I would acknowledge, and we've spoken about this before, useful fictions and cases, I would hope rare cases where fiction is more adaptive or more useful than the truth, right? That there's sometimes the truth can be not worth knowing, and I would argue that there are those cases,
okay,
but they're not. But they're few and far.
I don't believe that the truth can ever not be worth knowing. I would say that the idea that truth could not be worth knowing would be epistemically impossible, because we would have to know of it to find out whether it was not worth knowing. So we'd have to know that it was not worth knowing. In which case, we may not value a particular truth, but the truth as itself always instantiates its value. We must always seek truth in and of itself, whether we reject the knowledge of a particular event or not. So, for example, if someone says, my husband, they find out their husband was killed in a tragic accident, and someone tries to explain to them how they died, they go, no, it would be better for me not to know how they died. That's fair enough. But that's separate. That point is based fundamentally upon an understanding of the pain it would cause them in relation to the knowledge that they obtain, which is a form of knowledge in and of itself. So take into consideration that even if we don't value a particular truth, we must always value truth in and of itself.
Far between,
we should focus on that to some degree.
Yeah, so I wanted to just point to Douglas here and focus on that, because I think your fear, Douglas, is that my style, or Richard Dawkins' style, or Christopher Hitchens' style of anti-theism, just let's just throw the vicars from the rooftops now, because it is time to end this thing.
That's
not
putting it at its
literally.
hardest.
Get off Twitter now, but
That's a hashtag, if ever I heard one.
yes. Your concern has been that, and I think Jordan shares this, that so much of what is good in our Western developed societies is at the very least maintained by maintaining so-called Judeo-Christian values or the remnants of our past religiosity, and that there is a baby in the bathwater that can be difficult to discern, and we can't empty the tub all at once, and this is very much of...
It's not about even emptying the tub. I mean, the whole point of the rejection of religion is the rejection of the bad parts of religion, the irrational, unjustifiable aspects of religion. If we keep the good parts of religion and it's rationally instantiated, then to reject that simply because of its historical grounding would be irrational by definition. And so this would be my worry as well in relation to the atheist perspective, particularly like that was perpetuated by Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins and so on, because many of them don't have an ethical foundation that is in any way near as developed as something like philosophical Thomism. I would argue that philosophical Thomism it mightn't be right in many ways, but is far better developed than the ethics of someone like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris. As much as they try, the traditions which led to philosophical Thomism were developed over thousands of years between great minds which conceptually bettered